about equity, what better time to have a conversation like this? It's a very it's a very timely thing. I mean, something that I can really clearly see that I think we can all agree as humans that we want a better world. We want to see something better than we're seeing now. But I think the problem is that we are not agreeing that equity is part of what can get us there.
Mm-hmm.
And some people believe equality is something that is even needed than, okay, sound is on now. All right, thank you. Thank you, Robert, for letting us know. Some people think equality is what is needed, not equity. And I can quickly share a story. So when I was preparing for this session, reading your book, all right, one of my kids saw the book, and the particular kid quickly read the book and said, well, the truth about equality
Mm-hmm.
is the title of the book. And it got me thinking, maybe some of this misinformation is not intentional. Maybe some people are not just taking their time to actually read in between the line to know that there's actually a difference between equality and equity. And the good thing is that you wrote a book about it. And that's what we're trying to discuss today.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that really came to my mind in the book, I can see the sentence that you had for the most part that repeated itself a couple of times. Do you know what it is? I want to see if you can guess
No,
what
go
that
ahead.
is.
No, you tell
So
me.
equity is not a dirty word.
It's not a
Equity
what?
is not a dirty word. It's
Yeah.
not a dirty word. I think that's something that came up very frequently in your book.
Yeah,
Why? Why?
I actually wanted that to be the title of the book, but my editor said, "No, let's go with something else."
All right, all right. So I was not wrong about that observation. So why do you think? Maybe we should start from there. Why do you think it's very important to emphasize that?
Yeah, um, especially over the last few years, um, the anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion rhetoric has just grown sort of like a crescendo in music. And I think the reason, when you look at history, at least U.S. history and other countries as well, because there's issues around diversity, equity, inclusion in all countries. But when you look at history, when there's been a time in history where there's been a rise in social activism, whether they be the 1960s Civil Rights Act or apartheid in Africa or whatever. Um, Whenever there's been a rise in social activism, what usually follows the next few years is this rise in conservatism. So it's sort of like the pendulum swings, right? Back and forth and back and forth. And so that's what we've seen. And so after the murder of George Floyd in 2020 and Breonna Taylor and the civil unrest that happened there, we gradually started to see 22, 23, 24, this rise in this um, conservatism. So the anti-DEI rhetoric, you started seeing that raise its head, and then culminating in the this administration as well, and some of the things that were done and continue to be done around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when I say it's not a dirty word, it people became fearful of it. People, corporations, leaders, different organizations became fearful of it, and they started really saying, okay, well, we can't say that word, or we can't do this because thinking that it was in some way illegal, even. And it wasn't illegal. Equity is not illegal. What was illegal, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices before January of this year were also illegal after January of this year. There's no changes in the law from that perspective. And so, but what has happened is this from a cultural political sense of attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we have to be very clear around the law, which is the Civil Rights Act, and also sort of the misinformation and also the strategic disinformation that has done purposeful disinformation that has been put out there as well around it. And so I wanted to to write the book to say, we need to get a voice out there, not a voice, but continue the voices, because there are certainly voices out there, but voices out there that are very clear around what it is, what it isn't, and why, when we get it right, everyone will win. It's
Yeah.
not something that just benefits one group over another. Everyone will win if we can put the right strategy in place that allows us to get to ultimately an inclusive society, an inclusive organization, etc. Truly
Wow.
inclusive.
Truly inclusive. Everyone will win. And in your book, The Truth About Equity, you made mention that one of the things that can be done is to look at the situation with a fence right in front of the individual, and
Hmm.
also opportunity to see if there's need to use the equity blocks to
Yeah.
make people see over the fence.
Yeah.
And you said the rocks of equity are the short-term solution to a larger problem that will require a much longer time to solve. But in the time that you're waiting to remove the fence, all right, we have to put equity blocks in place so that people can see over the fence.
And let me do just to clarify for some of your audience that may not know kind of what we're talking about. We're
Yeah.
familiar with that illustration, but there was an illustration that was created by Deloitte, and it basically has three sort of uh, illustrations in this. The first illustration, it has three people that are standing next to a fence. They're all standing on one rock. The person on the right can't see over the fence. The person in the middle can barely see over the fence. The person on the left can clearly see over the fence. In the second illustration, the person on the right has been given two additional rocks so they can see over the fence now. The person in the middle has been given one additional rock so they can see over the fence. And the person on the left still has the one rock because they were always able to see over the fence. And in my analogy that I use for the purposes of the book, the rocks that are given represent acts of equity.
Yeah.
And so there is equal access for everyone to see over the fence. And the fence represents, so the acts of equity are employee resource groups, various different uh, sourcing strategies for recruiters and staffers bringing people into an organization. Um, Various different things that are done to allow people to get access around talent management programs and et cetera. And so also, but what needs to be done is that fence, in my analogy, it represents all of the isms, the longer term issues that didn't crop up overnight. They've been happening gradually over the course of decades and centuries even. And I call those isms racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, all of those things that are going to take a longer term strategy to try to correct. And so we need to be doing the body of work, which is the rocks in place, the acts of equity, which are near term and mid-term strategies. We need to be doing tearing the fence down, which is the longer term strategies. And then the third thing, that also what we need to be doing is, because what's happening during this time of when you're doing the acts of equity, because that's more visible than the longer term strategy, it's causing disruption. And what's happening is the person who was standing on one rock in the first illustration and is still standing on one rock in the second illustration, well, they're looking to their right and they're saying, well, how come they have three rocks and they have two and I just have one? That's not fair. That's not inclusion. That's not like, that's not even fair. Like, I don't understand why they have it. That's exclusion. And you're giving them preferential treatment. And what we have to do is we have to have a conversation with that individual who is standing on one rock so they understand that the fence is there, how
Yeah.
that manifests itself to his colleagues on the right, what that looks like in the organization, the marginalism, the bias, the all of those things that are holding them back, the obstacles and the barriers that are holding them back from having that access to opportunities. and aspirations. And so we need to have that conversation. We need to give them tools, resources, so they can understand it and get it intellectually. But we also need to get them to be active allies, not passive allies, but active allies, and get in the boat, grab an oar, and help us to row up the river so we can do the work that needs to get done. So we can get to that third illustration, which is the rocks are gone, the fence is torn down, and everybody can see the beautiful mountains ahead. Because even that person that was standing on one rock in both those first two illustrations,
Yeah.
when the fence is torn down, they realized that the fence was there because they could see the mountains and everything, but now they can see even a broader area. Maybe there was a river beyond the forest, or maybe there were other things that they didn't see, animals and things, but now they can see the whole picture. And it does benefit if we get it right. If we do the equity, we do the longer term strategy, we bring people along that may feel disenfranchised, we'll get to that third illustration. We're not there yet.
Yep.
And so we're at that second illustration where we're putting those acts of equity in, and the person on the left it's causing a disruption in them because they don't understand what we're doing, and they don't see the fence ahead because they've always been able to see over the fence. They've always had access to those opportunities.
Good, good. Thank you so much for saying that. If you're here, please let us know where you're joining us from. And if you have questions for our guest, Celeste, please put it in the chat. And Dr. Robert Cooper, thank you for joining. And Velma, thank you also for joining. The sound is good. Thank you for letting us know that the sound is good. So what you just explained now is called the equity disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And you give an example in the book that I really love in your book, The Truth About Equity. You said, why did you get to join the summer program when I could not have used the learning support like that?
Yeah. That was a very an eye-opening experience. And so for your listeners, I opened the book with a personal experience. And, we've all had experiences along our lifetimes, but this one sort of stood out for me. When I was in undergraduate at school, at the university, I went to school for television journalism, for telecommunications. And I worked as a reporter for a few years, but I wasn't making enough money to sustain myself. I had to consistently write home to my mother and father and ask for help with the rent for my apartment and car note and all this other stuff. And I said, I gotta change careers. And so my older sister talked me into going back to graduate school. And so I said, okay, well, I'll do that. And so I ended up going to Carnegie Mellon University. I got in, but I got in and I attended so I could get myself on equal footing with the rest of my fellow students going in the fall. I went to their summer program, which was designed to help students, and they targeted students of color back then who needed certain courses. So they were on equal footing in the fall when the classes began. So I signed up for this program, and I took things that I hadn't taken in undergraduate that I didn't need for my telecom major, but needed to be able to get in, not to get in because I'd already been accepted, but to really just not be way behind academically. And so I met a lot of other students. There was about 60 students in this summer program at Carnegie Mellon. And so when we became very close, through the course of the summer, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And when the classes started in the fall, we sort of had a camaraderie and an instant network because we had been together all summer. And so I remember there was an individual who noticed that we all sort of knew each other right off the bat. And he asked, how do you guys know each other? And I said, well, we went through this program over the summer. And I explained kind of the program. We took these courses and it helped us to really be prepared for the fall. And instead of them saying, oh, that's being positive, they basically kind of said, well, why are you getting invited to this program? How come I didn't get invited to this program? And just started kind of going down this path. And I remember thinking, like, good Lord, you probably got a chance. You took all of these courses in your undergraduate. You probably got to spend the summer on some beach somewhere, having fun. We were sequestered in the dorms and having to have to go through this program and studying, and this wasn't easy by any means. And it just was kind of like, wow, you really don't understand that we needed equal footing so we could be, at the same level and same understanding of going into this fall semester with the courses that we had to take. And it was really something that I just never forgot. And it was sure, I went to the University of Kentucky, so undergraduate, and I know, about just inequities and various different things from my experiences. But that was something that just really stood up to me, to talk about equity and how it was misinterpreted because someone thought we got preferential treatment over them, and they already had the advantage if we didn't go through that program coming in from an academic perspective. That was really it was something that stuck out for me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's very powerful. I mean, so in the book, you emphasize also the privilege debate, in which case, if somebody's privileged, do they actually know their privilege? And which got me thinking, if somebody in the majority group is privileged and they actually don't know that they're privileged sincerely, because that's where it appears. Like what you guys talking about, we don't get what you guys talking about. Where's the privilege? Maybe you can compare that to having money in a bank account and you don't know the bank account even exists and you're hungry. It's because I'm trying to look at it from that side of the view. What can be done to create awareness around, well, there's actually something that is called privilege, in case you're not aware. I think that's another way to start the conversation.
Yeah. So I can remember having a conversation with a C-suite leader, a vice president, and this was years ago. And we were at a conference, and I was at a table, and I was the only female, and I was the only person of color at this table of 10. And we were at this workshop, and it was around it wasn't understanding your biases, but it was a diversity and inclusion workshop. And we got on the subject of sponsorship and mentorship. And the individuals that were sitting at my table were like, well, what's the difference? They're the same thing. And I said, no, they're not the same thing. And I was explaining sponsorship. And they were like, well, no, I don't get it. Mentor, sponsor, it's the same thing. What's the difference? What's a sponsor? What is that? And they truly didn't understand what it was. And so I said, well, a sponsor, and I explained to them what it was. And they still didn't understand. And this one individual that I was having a conversation with specifically just kept on asking, and like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why do you even need that? He was basically, in his words, explaining, well, it's a meritocracy.
Yeah.
And I said, do you really think you got to where you are without someone sponsoring you, without someone having those conversations about you in the back rooms, in the boardrooms, in the conference rooms, in those succession planning meetings, in those talent meetings, someone who you don't have any clue who that might have been, but it's someone that sort of took you under their wing, saw something about you. And it may have been something as simple as, you look like me, and you're from the same school as I am. You hang out in the same places that I do over the summer. It might be something just as simple as that. And but you got to where you are because of that. And he started, thinking about it, and all of a sudden something kind of clicked in his mind
Yeah.
about, oh, okay, I get it now. And that was sort of that brought on the conversation around privilege. And you're right, there are people who truly, and if you assume good intent in people,
Yeah.
they don't understand the concept of privilege. And historically, especially over the last probably 10 years or so, the word privilege, when it's spoken, sometimes it's spoken as a weapon.
Yeah.
And so privilege doesn't know a race, a gender, or this or that, because there's privilege in all different identities. Um, and it's just a matter of understanding your privilege, the things that have been you've gotten access to, you've had opportunities to, that have made it easier for you than others to get access to those opportunities and those aspirations. And the first thing you need to do is understand it, that it exists. Privilege does exist. And then it's how you are using that privilege to help others. And so your power of your platform, if you were, and how you're using it. So Talu is an example. You're using this podcast and your platform to be able to speak truth to power. And so how are you using that privilege to help others? And that's really, really important. That people understand that, and not weaponizing it, but just saying that you have opportunities, and that others don't have, simply because of where they were born, the zip code that they were born, who they were born, what they looked like when they were born. All of those things play into it. And so the question is, you don't have to deny it, but it's just, how are you using it? And that's what's, I think, really, really important.
Wow, thank you. You mentioned something very interesting, the zip code that you were born, and that made me remember the story in your book about when you were trying to get apartment in Jackson, Florida, and what you had to do the second time to make sure that you were not in the same situation that you were in the first
Yes.
time. You want to say something about that?
Oh yeah, that was quite an interesting story. Um, when I was working for a company, this is back in the, I don't want to date myself, but it was a long time ago. It was my first job out of grad school. And I was working in New Jersey, but I got transferred down to Jacksonville, Florida. And at the time, Jacksonville was not the Jacksonville that you see today. I used to jokingly call it the southernmost city in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I think Georgia's bad, but it was the South. It was still the South. It wasn't Miami or Orlando or anything like that. So um, when I was transferred down there, the company moved me, and so they set up the time with the realtor and all of this, and I wasn't really in a position. I was young, and I wasn't in a position to buy anything. And then plus two, throughout my early part of my career, I moved like every 2 years to a different city with a different job. So I usually just rented townhouses and things like that. But so the company filled out all my information, and then they sent it to the person who was going to be helping me. And when I walked into the office, the realtor office, and they saw the color of my skin, well, it was like this sort of, oh. And then all of a sudden, um, neighborhoods that they were going to show me, they didn't show me. Because the company had sent me a list of various different areas. I wasn't familiar with the areas. I didn't know Jacksonville from if there anything. And so, but I noticed that there were certain places that I wasn't going. Oh, what about this? Oh, you wouldn't be interested in that. Then so I ended up taking a place. I ended up taking a place, and then I get restless and was like, oh, I want to live somewhere else. So about a year and a half later, I said, well, I'm going to be here another year, so I'm going to move somewhere else. I'm going to move out to the beach. And so, but this time, because I knew what had happened to me, I did, and you couldn't do this now, but back then you could. I did everything like sort of over the phone, and I put where I wanted to go and everything. The company was a pretty established company in Jacksonville, well known. What my role was and all of that, how much I made and everything. And all of a sudden, these things all opened up to me, and they were like, "Oh, well, we can
Yeah.
put you here, here, here." Again, renting, and I
Yeah.
ended up getting a townhouse in Ponte Vedra Beach, which is where the PGA, the Professional Golfing Association, was down there, and everything. Very, very nice area on the beach. And so I ended up getting that, and so signed all the papers, did everything via remotely. Signed all the papers, signed the lease, did all of that stuff before I even walked into the leasing the area, the realtor, and so I walked in to basically confirm everything because they couldn't go back.
Yeah.
And it was funny because when I walked in and they kind of looked at me and they were like, well, yeah. I said, can I have my lease and my keys and this and that, and I'll go ahead and get ready to be moved in. So it was a very interesting time for me. But I through my journey, I've sort of learned from my experiences, and they go in this file folder, and I just use them as I get older and more mature and more what's the word, more confident in my ability to be able to do what I need to do to take care of myself and my family.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for sharing that. That's a very powerful story. So one of the things that I also observed from the book is the fact that the name DI was not what it was called before. It was called Affirmative Action in 1961, and
In the 60s,
Diversity,
yeah.
and Diversity Initiative in 2000. Then 2010, that's when we started saying, well, DI. And it seems that the change in name did not favor the whole movement, because now in 2025, DI now was under a very great attack than it was in previous years, based on my understanding. So I want you to say something about that. Is
Yeah.
that
The things evolve and change. And yes, back in the 60s, it was affirmative action with the executive order with Lyndon B, the president then, Lyndon B. Johnson. And it was basically, we know that people don't have the same opportunities. It acknowledged that and said that we need to do affirmative actions to try to, for a better word, level the playing field, if you were, but not doing things that were illegal against the Civil Rights Act, but basically saying that, we don't want you to be hiring people on the basis of what they look like, whether that be female, race, sexual orientation, whatever. And so, but there was a lot of folks back then, as you can imagine, at the height of the Civil Rights Act, that didn't like that. They didn't like it. They didn't subscribe to it, and so there was a lot of energy that got to trying to squelch that movement and just the work. And then we started to hear diversity and inclusion, and mainly diversity. It was like diversity. And I can remember when I was in Jacksonville, as a matter of fact, and I was responsible for equal employment opportunity at the place where I was working. It was one of the things that I was responsible for. So affirmative action plans. And I can remember the head of affirmative action. They were talking about her talking with her to say, well, we should change the name to diversity, the diversity organization. And she was like, oh, no, we need to keep it affirmative action. That's what it's about, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually, while affirmative action and EEOC plans, all of that didn't go away, the name diversity started to evolve and become part of this. And then inclusion was added, because diversity is acknowledging the differences in people, differences you can see, differences you can't see. That's diversity, it's differences. And then inclusion started becoming a part of that, where it's, okay, we want to make sure that we're creating an environment with all of these different people with all their different identities, that there's a culture of inclusion so everyone feels valued and empowered to lift and elevate their voice. And so then fast forward to the 2020s and 2022, 2023, 2024, and 5, where it's again, I told you that pendulum is swinging to conservatism, where people are saying, well, that diversity, equity, inclusion, all it did was exclude those that are in the majority, and it gave those that were in the minority preferential treatment, and that's against the law. And again, without understanding the essence of what it is, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of those, all of that misinformation then surfaced and raised its head. So now people are saying, well, maybe we just need to call it something else. And I don't know if we need to call it something else. I just think we need to be very clear in how we're explaining it. And I get it that, you don't want to be able to not do the work anymore. But what people, I don't think, understand, Tolu, is diversity is differences in people, differences you can see and you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion is is basically the collective purpose of an organization. So for an organization, that would be the mission and vision of that organization, why that organization exists. And then equity is how you get all of those people with all of their differences, different skills, capabilities, cultural backgrounds, identities, obstacles, barriers. How do you get all of those people with all of those differences to that collective purpose? And acts of equity is how you do that, because you have to meet people where they are, understand what's getting in the way for them to be able to grasp and understand and embrace that collective purpose, and put those acts in place to get them from where they are to where you want them to be, which is ultimately that collective purpose of that organization. You can't run an organization successfully if you don't get that, if you don't understand that. And so understanding the essence of diversity, equity, inclusion, it's basically good leadership, it's good management, and then also it's good business. On the business side, it's marketing 101. Because whatever I sell, whatever it might be, a product, a service, I have to understand my customer base. And if I don't understand my customer base, which, by the way, is extremely diverse, you have to do the customer segmentation. You have to understand different markets. You have to understand your different aspects of what's getting in the way of them being able to leverage and use your product or your service. And in order to do that, you have to understand the diversity of your customer base. So, and that's marketing 101. If you don't understand how to do that, you can't even sell your product. You can't commercialize it. Can't get it to the market. So it's basic understanding of these simple diversity, equity, and inclusion principles that I'd like to explain very pragmatically, that if you don't understand that, you're not going to be successful as a manager, as a leader, or in your business.
Wow, interesting. I think when people fall into that trap, that's when they say, well, DEI means that people are not competent with what they are doing.
That's another myth. What it isn't, that I talk about in the book is
yeah.
it's how many times have we heard, a recruiter or a staffing professional will say to the hiring manager, I want to make sure that I bring in a diverse slate of candidates for you to choose from. And the hiring manager might say something like, well, I want to make sure they're quality candidates and they're qualified for the job.
Hmm.
And the question that you have to ask next is, why did you even feel that you had a need to say that when the recruiter said they wanted to make sure that they were bringing in a diverse slate? And it's because when they hear diverse, they think inferior, that they don't have skill sets, that they aren't as smart, that they aren't as skilled, they aren't as intelligent. And that's a bias that people have, whether unconscious or conscious, but it's a bias. And so, I like to have conversations sometimes when I'm in this dialogue and say, okay, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to envision your perfect candidate. What do they look like? And then all of a sudden the eyes pop up and it's like, because they've envisioned them as somebody who looks like them. And it's like, first of all, you're insulting the capability and the skills of that recruiter, because their job is to find first and foremost is to find qualified candidates that meet the skills, the capabilities, the experience that you requested in your job. That's their job. That's the baseline. What they're going to do is, and what you need to understand, hiring manager, is those skills and those capabilities, those competencies, and that experience can be embodied in people that look a variety of different ways. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make sure that they're bringing in candidates that meet those requirements, but also bring in a basis of cultural differences as well that will enhance your team.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very, very interesting. But that has been an ongoing
Mm.
discussion that even in 2026, we still hear people say. We still hear the bias in, well, I'm going to hire the male over the female because the female, she can still eventually she'll want to have children eventually, and then I'll lose her, even if it's for 9 months or whatever. She's going to want to take leave, and it's all of these biases. Pay inequity. Well, I'm going to pay this. He needs to earn more because he's the breadwinner of his family. Never mind that the mom may be the breadwinner of the family as well. And all of these things, these biases in today still happen. And we have to do what we can to try to pull those biases away from organizations, so that it can truly be an inclusive environment for all.
Good, good. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's very powerful. Thank you for joining us, Christy from Florida. It's nice to have you here. Please let us know where you're joining us from. Please put your questions in the chat in case you have any question for our guest. I'm originally from Nigeria, and I came to America a couple of years ago. I experienced so many cultural shock, but there's one that I can talk about today that is related to what we're talking about. The fact that elderly people are not raised in the house, they are not taken care of in the house with the family, and they have a separate home that they have to go to be there for some time until maybe they pass and something like that in some cases. And I think you also touched on that in your book, that many government programs still prioritize funding for nursing homes over home-based care. I think that kind of answered my thinking as to
Mhm.
why that was very different to what I was used to or what I would expect to see.
Yeah.
Any reason why that is still, it seems that is still the situation, right?
Well, um, there definitely needs to be. There are some cultures where that is, as you talked about it. There are some cultures where that's just a given. That you take care of the elderly, that they're in your home. That's your responsibility. Just like it's your responsibility to raise your children. It's your responsibility to make sure that you're taking care of your parents and you're taking care of your elderly. And you see multiple generations in one household. because that's the responsibility that they feel. That's part of their culture. And in many cultures, it's not. And so, you see the senior living facilities, the assisted living facilities, and it becomes necessary for elderly to go into these facilities because maybe the home that they had is too large, or they can't get up and down, or because of physical ailments or whatever it may be. And it's something that it's sad, but it's a reality, unfortunately, in some cultures where that's just not something. I was raised a woman of faith, and it's like 10 commandments: honor thy mother and thy father. That's that's a big part of um of my ingrained sort of how I think as well. And but yeah, it is something that a lot of, when it comes to generations, that respect for the elderly just isn't there sometimes, and it's sad. It's very, very sad.
Wow.
Even in the
Impressive.
workplace, sometimes, uh, those that are more tenured and more experienced in the workplace, it's sort of like they just want them to go away, and it's like, okay, you can, we want to get some fresh talent, some young talent, some folks in that have fresh ideas, and it's like, everyone has ideas. You respect the experience of your tenured workforce, because they can bring that historical perspective and meld it together with, and here's where this industry is going, and sort of bring it all together. But yeah, the generational um, sort of tension is there, is very much there.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. One thing that I also want to touch on, I swear, where the time is going very fast. I can't imagine what's going on here. We just started. There's something that you mentioned in the book, voting. Uh, what it used to be about 100 years ago, especially for women, Black women, they were not allowed to vote, but
Yeah.
now women can vote and Black people can vote and things like that. You mentioned a little bit about your experience of your dad around that, but then my question now is there a connection between that situation then and the fact that it's very difficult to even have a female president?
Uh,
It's in America, or even another black president. Is this is there a connection?
um, I think, Tolu, that there is still a lot of bias that exists within the United States. There's no mistaking that. Um, because a lot of times, if we really want to ensure that the most qualified person gets the role, when you look at people's backgrounds, we should be able to say, yes, clearly this woman has a very sound background, or this person of color has a very sound background historically. They have the skills, they have the capabilities, they have the experience, but something gets in the way of them being able to get on that platform. There's an example of um, the Philharmonic, the orchestra, and they were having trouble getting women in the orchestra, and so they'd have tryouts and everything, and it was like I think it was 70-80%. I can't remember the exact figure, men. And so what they moved to was blind auditions. So they'd close the curtain, and the person who was coming in to audition for the orchestra, you couldn't see them. You just heard them play. And so they then would pick people based on their how they sound, and that was it.
Yeah.
And over the course of several years, they were able to increase the female representation in the orchestra, because they weren't caught in the bias of what was going through their mind when they saw a woman come up on the stage to audition. And so that's an example of something that, if we can take the bias out of the systems that are responsible for putting people in certain positions, um, I think we could do a lot better. And that's that fence that I was talking about it
Yep.
earlier in our discussion. That's the systemic and institutional things that they didn't happen overnight. And it's going to take longer to sort of pull those apart and take the bias out of the systems and the institutions and society as a whole. We have a while to get there because, there's a lot of education, a lot of awareness, a lot of soul searching that needs to happen in America to be able to get there.
Good, good. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So, I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, but also very related.
Uh-huh.
Based on this conversation that I have with people already on a lifetime mode, I've told people, well, observing America as a whole, the only practical solution that I've seen for racism in America is interracial marriage.
Huh?
Like,
That's
that's the only thing. That's only, and most people will agree with me reluctantly. Some people will disagree and things like that. And I also know that you mentioned that in a book. And I also want to say, I want to make a jump by saying that by extension, that can also help equity in the long run, especially because the Pew Research from your book, your Pew Research Studies, Pew Research Center also said, well, by 2065, there's not going to be one single ethnicity in the US or in Britain anymore. That means maybe I'm not that crazy after all.
No, I mean, you can see where the demographics are going in the United States. And so let's look at, instead of just looking at the United States, let's look worldwide.
Yeah.
If you look worldwide, white cisgen males are already the minority, right? Worldwide. You have Asia, you have Latin America, you have Africa, you have all these continents that are primarily people of color, yes?
Yep.
And so Europe is just one continent, and even within Europe, there's a hodgepodge of different dimensions of diversity there. In the United States, a hodgepodge of different dimensions of diversity there. And so we're already globally at a space where people of color are the majority. In certain in certain regions like the United States, and we're not there yet within our borders. But as the global demographics, people are moving to different countries, people are migrating into the United States. That is going to change. It's not necessarily interracial marriage. That's one way that it does happen. But just the global dynamics and the global migration, it's just been on increased over the past probably 15 to 20 years. And so, and that's with the global economy, organizations, global companies, moving people, for their companies. It's a variety of different things. But yeah, you can't run away from it. You can't, because
Right.
it's inevitable. And so but it will help used to say decades ago, the cultural melting pot, if you will. Remember that phrase?
Yep.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's inevitable. It is absolutely inevitable that's going to happen in the United States. And so it's a matter of, what does our journey look like from here to there? And how do we make sure that we're creating, in this journey, we're creating an environment where people can thrive? That's the bottom line, where everyone can thrive, regardless of how you identify. That's going to be important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You mentioned
learning from the past.
Yeah.
Learning from the past, because we want to make sure that we learn from our history. I have a T-shirt that says, "Don't make me repeat myself." And then it says history. The author is history. And it's very, very true. Don't make me repeat myself, because, we don't, we need to learn from our history and then grow to be a better nation than what we are today. I'm not saying we're absolutely horrible, but
Yeah.
there are some good things about our nation. But there are a lot of things that aren't very good too, as with any other nation. And on our journey to this place of this eventually going to get to, let's make sure that we're doing things along the way that are going to create an environment where everyone can thrive. Everyone
Yes.
is given the opportunity to thrive if they so choose.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. You mentioned cultural melting points. I remember those days whereby, in order for a company to show that they're doing well, they put a black person on their website on the front page. They're doing something. It shows that they're a good company. Are those days gone forever?
No, we
That
want to make
I
sure.
think that's also very related to the question that we have in the chat by from Dr. Robert Kappa. Is saying that is DEI gone? Are those days gone forever, or should we be expecting that to come back at some point?
Yeah. So just as I was saying, we're not a nation of. Let me put it this way, and I'm going to put it in a corporation standpoint, a company standpoint. A company does not employ robots.
Hmm.
We have AI and all of that. I'm saying that aside, but people, flesh and blood people, they're not robots. They're individuals that have different skills, capabilities, identities, cultural awareness, cultural backgrounds, experiences. They're different. And so, in order for an organization to get them to a collective purpose, to get them to a level of performance, to get them to an optimization of performance, they have to meet people where they are and bring them forward. Meeting people where they are and giving them what they need to succeed is equity. Those are acts of equity. That's management 101.
Yeah.
You want to create, and then getting them to that culture of inclusion, which is the collective purpose. So if people understand that that's the essence of diversity, equity, and inclusion, taking all of those people with all of their differences, getting them to a collective purpose, which is the mission of the organization, D and I can't go away. I don't care what you call it. You can't go away, because people, unless you're just going to get rid of people and do things. I keep thinking of the Terminator movies, and there's a bunch of robots. People aren't going away. And so you have DE&I isn't going away. Trying to stop DE&I is like trying to stop the waves from reaching the shore. It's just not possible. Not possible.
Wow, it's not going away. That's very comforting. Thank you for sharing that. So
Yeah.
that means our nation is going to get better, just like Dr. Robert is asking there. So something I know I might take 1 or 2 extra minutes of your time, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to quickly mention something that your dad said in the book. Fear means a place of entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
where you go to see animals and put on some show and enjoy carnivals. Gorge yourself on some sweet. That was how bad the situation was then.
Yeah, and what he meant by that was my dad was the first Black teacher in Western Pennsylvania, and being the first and only, he went through a lot of different things, and I got a front row seat. My siblings and I and my mom, we got a front row seat to it every day at the dinner table. He would talk about his time, and so what he meant by that, fair is the place where you go look at pigs and eat funnel cake. And he meant, a fair that you go to. And
Yeah.
what he meant by that is what's fair to one person may not be fair to another person. And so bringing forward to 2026, what we like to and what we should be saying is fair and equitable practices. Because if I say fair practices, what I think is fair may not be fair to somebody else.
Yeah.
So we have to be very clear when we talk about it. So I like to use the words together: fair and equitable practices. So again, meeting people where they are and giving them what they need to succeed.
Wow, wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're wrapping up. I know it's exactly 2:00 now. But I want to ask this question because you were the vice president at Merck, chief diversity and inclusion at that point, and you probably have opportunity to have conversations that an average person like me probably will still not be able to have.
Mm-hmm.
When you in that kind of settings and you see things from inside at that level where you discuss, are there things that you wish people from outside understand?
Well, the only thing I will say, and I apologize, I got to get on another call, but
Yeah.
the only thing I would say is that people need to understand that corporations, they have a responsibility to their shareholders, to their board of directors, to their employees, and other internal and external stakeholders.
Yeah.
And so in order to do that, they're walking this tightrope, especially now, where they're trying to make sure that they mitigate any risk that are associated with the external climate.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also trying to make sure that they're maintaining the integrity and the credibility with their employees. And so in order to do that, there are not compromises. They have to make sure that they're walking it's a tightrope.
Yep.
And because I had to do that myself for years. And so being able to make sure that you're doing that without losing the credibility of your employees, because once you lose that, it's hard to get that back.
Yeah.
And making sure that you have the credibility of your shareholders, of your board of directors, and other external stakeholders is really, really critical. And it's not an easy time at all being inside in organizations. It's not easy. And so, we ask to give them grace as they walk this tightrope, and eventually they'll get in on the other side if they maintain their integrity and stand and hold close to the values and the standards around diversity and inclusion. They will get to the other side, and they'll get there with their integrity and their values intact.
Good. That's my last question. Any last thoughts you want to share with our?
No, if you want to get the book, you can go on Amazon and grab the book and write a review as well. So thank you for having me, Tolu.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Celeste. I really appreciate your knowledge, experience, and I will keep in touch. Thank you so much.